Welcome everyone. In today's video, we'll embark on a fascinating journey through time, a journey that goes far beyond our modern calendars and clocks. For centuries, humanity has followed a variety of timekeeping methods, from ancient sundials to digital clocks, from lunar cycles to solar calendars. But the structure most of us follow today, the Gregorian calendar, is relatively modern, having been established only in 1582. The Bible, however, offers a distinct approach to time that predates our current system by thousands of years. This ancient method is deeply spiritual, rooted in divine principles that transcend mere scheduling. Today, we'll look at how the Bible instructs us to mark time, considering the beginning of the day, the week, the month, and the year, all according to God's original design. As we begin, let's examine how the Bible marks the beginning of a day. Unlike our contemporary method, where days are considered to start at midnight, the biblical day starts at sunset. This idea comes from Genesis 1:5, where we read, "And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day." It's a pattern repeated throughout the creation account in Genesis, where each day is defined by evening and morning. This approach to marking the day with sunset emphasizes the importance of rest and renewal at day's end. The rhythm here invites us to pause and reflect at dusk, recognizing that God designed a cycle where rest precedes activity, setting the tone for a balanced life. The structure of the week, too, differs from our common understanding. In the Bible, the week begins on Sunday and culminates on Saturday, known as the Sabbath. This pattern is established in Genesis, where God creates the world in 6 days and rests on the seventh, blessing and sanctifying it. Exodus 28-11 further reinforces this cycle, reminding us to remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. This Sabbath rest serves as a reminder of God's creation and His covenant with humanity, calling believers to pause, worship, and rejuvenate. Unlike the modern weekend that often emphasizes relaxation for personal gain, the Sabbath offers a time dedicated to spiritual renewal and connection with the divine. The Bible's understanding of months also follows a unique structure, rooted in the lunar cycle. Each month begins with the appearance of the new moon, a practice often referenced in the Old Testament. For example, in Numbers 10:10, the Israelites are instructed to blow trumpets at the beginning of each month to mark the new moon, signaling a fresh start and calling the community together. The lunar cycle keeps us closely attuned to natural rhythms, fostering an awareness of the seasons in God's creation. This framework contrasts sharply with our solar-based months, where fixed lengths obscure the subtle shifts in nature, disconnecting us from the organic flow of time as observed in the heavens. Even the start of the year has a special significance in the biblical calendar, aligning closely with natural phenomena. While January 1st marks the new year in the Gregorian calendar, the Bible identifies the beginning of the year as falling around the spring equinox. This season signifies renewal in life, aligning with Passover, a pivotal event for the Israelites and for Christians. Exodus 12:2 establishes this timing when God instructs Moses and Aaron, "This month shall be for you the beginning of months." This concept emphasizes that the year doesn't start in the dead of winter, but during the season of rebirth, resonating with themes of liberation, growth, and divine promise. Why does the Bible emphasize this unique structure for time? On a spiritual level, these markers, sunset, the Sabbath, the new moon, and the spring season, are reminders of God's sovereignty over time and creation. They invite us to live in harmony with the divine order, experiencing the flow of time not as a rigid sequence, but as a living rhythm that draws us closer to God. Each cycle provides a space for reflection, rest, and reorientation, helping us align our lives with God's purposes. This perspective stands in contrast to the relentless pace of modern life, which often drives us toward constant productivity and achievement, leaving little room for spiritual reflection. The Bible's calendar, therefore, offers a countercultural invitation. Rather than measuring time by deadlines, appointments, or digital reminders, it encourages a relationship with time that honors God's creation and His design. When we pause to mark sunset as the beginning of a new day, or to honor the Sabbath rest, we're acknowledging that time itself is a gift from God, a resource to be stewarded with reverence and gratitude. This mindset shifts us from viewing time as a scarce commodity to be controlled, to seeing it as a generous provision from a loving Creator who knows our need for balance, renewal, and worship. Let's delve deeper into the significance of starting the day at sunset. In today's world, midnight serves as the threshold between one day and the next, a moment barely noticed by most. But in the Bible's framework, sunset ushers in a new day with intention. As the light fades and shadows lengthen, we're invited into a time of rest, releasing the work and concerns of the day. This rhythm allows us to begin each day in a state of peace, preparing our hearts and minds for what lies ahead. The sunset transition fosters an atmosphere of closure and gratitude, a reminder that life is more than tasks. It is also about trusting in God's provision as we lay down to rest. Understanding the week's structure as described in the Bible gives us insight into the purpose behind the Sabbath. Today's culture often relegates the concept of rest to mere relaxation or leisure activities. But the biblical Sabbath is different. It's a holy time set apart, a day of worship, reflection, and reconnection with God. The Sabbath reinforces the notion that we are more than our productivity. We are beings designed to dwell in relationship with our Creator. By setting aside one day each week, we are reminded that our value is not defined by what we achieve, but by our identity as children of God. This sacred time carves out space for us to step back from the demands of life and remember what truly matters. Similarly, the lunar months provide a unique rhythm that grounds us in the cycles of nature. Unlike the Gregorian months, which are fixed in length, the lunar months align with the phases of the moon, each new moon signaling a fresh start. This practice keeps us in touch with the world around us, fostering an awareness of the subtle shifts in creation. The new moon, often celebrated with feasts or gatherings in biblical times, symbolizes renewal and opportunity, a time to reassess, to seek God's guidance, and to realign our lives with His will. This rhythm brings us back to the Creator's design, reminding us of the cycles of growth, rest, and rejuvenation that sustain all of life. The lunar cycle's prominence in the biblical calendar also symbolizes humanity's connection to creation. Unlike the sun, which shines constantly, the moon changes, waxing and waning, reflecting the journey of human life filled with seasons of growth, loss, and renewal. Each new moon marks a fresh beginning, inviting us to embrace new intentions, learn from past experiences, and open ourselves to God's guidance. This monthly rhythm emphasizes that, just as nature goes through phases, so do we, and every new month offers a chance for spiritual rejuvenation aligned with God's divine cycle. The biblical year beginning in spring aligns with the theme of rebirth found throughout Scripture. In the natural world, spring represents growth, fertility, and new life, a fitting start for the year in God's calendar. As flowers bloom and trees grow green again, the Bible uses this time to signify spiritual renewal. This starting point invites us to consider our lives afresh, assessing our spiritual paths, our intentions, and the direction in which we're moving. By starting the year in spring, we're reminded that God is constantly at work, breathing new life into creation and into our hearts. The timing of the biblical year also highlights an important event: Passover. As one of the most significant holidays in the biblical tradition, Passover commemorates God's deliverance of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. Occurring in early spring, Passover embodies themes of liberation, divine faithfulness, and covenant. When the year begins with such a powerful reminder of God's mercy, it sets a spiritual tone that reverberates throughout the following months, reminding believers of the need for gratitude, faith, and trust in God's promises. This rhythm shapes a year not around personal milestones or productivity, but around divine remembrance and celebration. Following the biblical calendar encourages a way of life where sacred moments aren't confined to a single day or season, but are woven into each phase of time. Whether observing sunset as a new day's beginning, embracing Sabbath rest, or celebrating a new moon, we're constantly reminded of God's presence. These cycles keep us rooted, providing a spiritual rhythm that balances activity with reflection, work with rest. They also serve as a counterbalance to the fast-paced demands of modern life, which can pull us away from moments of pause, appreciation, and worship. In our exploration of this calendar, it's helpful to look at how these practices shape the lives of biblical communities. For ancient Israelites, time was deeply communal. The Sabbath, festivals, and new moons were often celebrated together, fostering a collective identity centered on shared beliefs and values. These rhythms strengthen bonds within families and communities, offering regular times for gathering, feasting, worship, and storytelling. By aligning themselves with God's timing, they cultivated a society that prioritized spiritual well-being and relational connection over individual achievement or accumulation. The Sabbath especially was a gift that differentiated Israel from surrounding nations. In a world where continual labor was common, taking a day off each week to rest and worship marked them as a people set apart by God. Observing the Sabbath was a declaration of faith, an acknowledgement that life is not solely dependent on human effort, but is sustained by God's provision. This principle challenged believers to relinquish control and place their trust in God, honoring Him as the true source of life and abundance. For us today, the Sabbath offers a similar invitation to let go, rest, and remember who ultimately holds our lives. As we look closer at sunset marking the day's beginning, we also see an invitation to surrender our need for control. The setting sun reminds us that God is sovereign, guiding the flow of time and creation. Ending the day with rest and beginning anew with the dawn instills a sense of humility, teaching us to let go of our anxieties, accomplishments, and concerns. This approach helps us recognize that while we may labor, it's ultimately God who watches over and sustains us. By aligning our daily rhythm with the sunset, we acknowledge God's hand in our lives and our dependency on His grace. The lunar calendar's monthly cycle also symbolizes renewal and dedication, qualities that God values in His people. Each new moon was traditionally a time for sacrifices and celebrations, as seen in passages like 1 Samuel 20 verse 5, where David celebrates the new moon with King Saul. This regular practice nurtured a culture of reflection and worship, where individuals and communities could pause, give thanks, and seek divine guidance. This structure invites us today to pause monthly and recalibrate our lives, refocusing on God's purposes and aligning our steps with His will. Each aspect of the biblical calendar, from the weekly Sabbath to the yearly festivals, invites us to see time through a lens of worship and gratitude. Instead of rushing through life, constantly focused on future goals, this calendar centers us in the present moment. By observing God's timing, we cultivate an awareness of His presence and action in our daily lives. This approach reminds us that time is not something to be feared or hoarded, but is a sacred gift to be celebrated and shared. As we walk through life with an awareness of divine timing, we're freed from the anxiety of scarcity and empowered to embrace each day as it comes. The Bible's emphasis on marking time serves a dual purpose. It honors God and benefits our well-being. Following a rhythm that prioritizes rest, reflection, and communal celebration is good for the soul, helping us find balance in a world that often values busyness over being. The structure provided by God's calendar nurtures our spiritual, mental, and physical health, providing a sanctuary from the relentless demands of society. Each sunset, Sabbath, and season becomes an opportunity to breathe, to slow down, and to recognize the beauty of God's creation in a way that restores our inner peace. Another important aspect of the biblical calendar is its inherent connection to the land and nature. The Hebrew calendar, which closely aligns with biblical principles, is agriculturally based, with many holy days tied to harvest seasons and agricultural cycles. Festivals like Passover, Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles are directly related to planting and harvesting. This calendar not only grounds people in the natural rhythms of the earth, but also underscores a reliance on God's provision. By observing these cycles, believers are reminded of their dependence on both the Creator and creation, fostering a sense of stewardship and respect for the environment. The annual festivals, particularly, serve as powerful reminders of God's intervention in history and His ongoing relationship with humanity. Each celebration marks key events in Israel's story, from the liberation of Passover to the wilderness provision celebrated at the Feast of Tabernacles. These observances allow participants to relive their spiritual heritage, recognizing God's hand in history and finding assurance in His promises. In a way, these festivals serve as annual checkpoints, providing a time to reflect on God's faithfulness, reaffirming trust in His guidance, and passing down the lessons of faith from generation to generation. One of the unique features of the biblical calendar is the Jubilee year, which occurs every 50th year as described in Leviticus 25. The Jubilee is a year of liberation where debts are forgiven, slaves are freed, and land is returned to its original owners. This remarkable institution highlights themes of justice, mercy, and equality, underscoring that all things ultimately belong to God. The Jubilee serves as a reset button, emphasizing that wealth and status should not be hoarded, but shared in ways that promote community well-being. It reflects God's desire for a society rooted in compassion and fairness, where each generation has an opportunity to thrive. This principle of Jubilee aligns with the concept of Sabbath years, where every 7th year, the land is to be left fallow, allowing it to rest and rejuvenate. This practice not only shows respect for the earth, but also acknowledges that growth and production come from God. By resting the land, people are reminded that they are stewards, not owners, of creation. The Sabbath year teaches us humility and encourages us to step back, recognizing that life's blessings come from God's grace. In modern times, this principle challenges us to consider how we might integrate rhythms of rest and renewal into our relationship with the environment. In observing these biblical cycles, individuals and communities experience a deepened sense of connection to each other, to creation, and to God. Each observance, whether a Sabbath or a festival, calls for shared reflection, communal worship, and collective remembrance. These regular gatherings strengthen the bonds between community members, creating a network of support and accountability. The calendar fosters a sense of identity, uniting people under shared beliefs and practices. This is in stark contrast to the often individualistic approach of modern life, which can leave people feeling isolated and disconnected from their spiritual roots. From the Sabbath day to the Sabbath year, these cycles in the Bible promote a sense of balance and harmony, qualities that are often missing in today's fast-paced culture. The structure of the biblical calendar offers an antidote to the rush and anxiety of contemporary life, inviting us to step into a rhythm that nurtures our soul. Observing these divine time markers teaches patience, helping us to let go of the need for instant gratification and embrace the slower, more deliberate pace that fosters deeper reflection and joy. It is a rhythm that values process over product, faith over control. For example, the Feast of Tabernacles, also known as Sukkot, celebrates God's provision during Israel's wilderness journey. During this week-long festival, participants live in temporary shelters, reminding them of their ancestors' reliance on God. This tradition instills gratitude, humility, and trust in God's continued care. By temporarily stepping out of the comforts of daily life, believers are invited to experience a renewed dependence on God, mirroring the Israelites' reliance on Him in the wilderness. This annual observance encourages spiritual growth, reminding us to look beyond our material possessions and toward God as the ultimate source of security. In modern times, adopting aspects of the biblical calendar can serve as a powerful tool for spiritual alignment. Even small practices, like observing the Sabbath or noting the new moon, can bring a greater awareness of God's presence. These markers provide an opportunity to pause, breathe, and reflect, creating sacred moments in the midst of our routines. As we align with God's timing, we experience a renewed sense of purpose and clarity, recognizing that our lives are part of a greater story. This practice invites us to view each day, week, month, and year as a canvas for experiencing God's grace. The concept of the biblical day beginning at sunset can transform our daily routines. Imagine ending each day with a sense of closure, letting go of the worries and accomplishments of the day, and entering into rest. This practice can help us cultivate gratitude as we reflect on the blessings and challenges we experience. By starting the day with rest, we begin each new cycle refreshed, prepared to face the task ahead with a sense of peace. It's a rhythm that acknowledges our limitations and the necessity of rest, teaching us to rely on God rather than our strength. As we reflect on the biblical calendar's impact on individuals and communities, It's clear that this structure offers a profound sense of grounding and stability. Each time marker acts as a reminder of God's sovereignty and our relationship with Him. In observing these cycles, we cultivate a mindset that values reflection, renewal, and reverence. The structure encourages us to live not just for ourselves, but in harmony with others and creation. Through these practices, we learn to see time as an extension of God's love, a gift that offers not only order, but also a path to spiritual growth and fulfillment. The significance of aligning with a biblically inspired timekeeping structure reaches into every facet of life, including our personal relationship with God. By following His ordained rhythms, we're encouraged to set aside specific times, not just for communal gatherings, but for personal reflection and worship. Each sunset becomes an opportunity to reset spiritually, bringing our hearts closer to God. This alignment creates a daily reminder that we're part of a divine design, reassuring us that every day holds purpose, not only in our activities, but in the time we dedicate to simply being present with God. In considering the Sabbath, it becomes clear that this day of rest was intended not just as a personal pause, but as a communal experience. Observing the Sabbath within families and communities fosters a bond that's rooted in shared faith and values. This day becomes a powerful countercultural act, as it brings people together in a way that defies the pressure to be constantly productive. Through worship, shared meals, and conversation, the Sabbath binds families and communities together, building a support system that nurtures spiritual growth and relational depth. The annual festivals serve a similar purpose. These times of celebration offer structured opportunities to come together, remember shared histories, and celebrate God's provision. Each festival is not merely a ritual, but a vivid reenactment of the faith journey, connecting believers across generations. By engaging in these traditions, communities renew their collective identity and purpose, finding strength and encouragement in their shared heritage. This continuity of faith fosters resilience, reminding each generation of God's continued guidance and faithfulness through the ages. One of the key aspects of the biblical calendar is its integration with nature's rhythms. In observing the phases of the moon and the cycles of harvest, believers are reminded that their lives are intertwined with creation. This close connection to nature fosters a sense of stewardship, as it highlights the responsibility to care for the earth that God has entrusted to humanity. Observing God's timing, which is naturally embedded within creation, reinforces our role as caretakers, encouraging sustainable practices that honor and protect the beauty of the world around us. The Sabbath year, a time when the land is left fallow, exemplifies this stewardship principle. Every 7 years, fields are to rest, an act that not only rejuvenates the soil, but also acknowledges that productivity is not the ultimate measure of value. By giving the land a chance to restore itself, believers affirm their dependence on God's provision. This principle can inspire modern practices of sustainability, urging us to adopt habits that respect the natural world rather than deplete it. It's a reminder that we are caretakers, not exploiters, of God's creation. As we reflect on these ancient practices, we begin to see the biblical calendar as a guide for balanced living. In a world that often glorifies constant activity, this framework teaches us to value periods of rest, contemplation, and gratitude. Observing God's timing helps us to resist the pull of overwork and stress, teaching us instead to embrace a slower, more meaningful pace. This rhythm of work and rest, of gathering and reflecting, allows us to experience life more fully, appreciating each moment as a part of God's provision. The Jubilee, which occurs every 50 years, stands as a pinnacle of justice within the biblical time structure. This year of liberation, where debts are forgiven and land is returned, represents God's heart for equality and restoration. The Jubilee underscores that no one is to be trapped in a cycle of poverty or oppression forever, emphasizing God's desire for a society rooted in compassion. This powerful concept encourages us to think beyond personal gain, challenging us to consider how we might bring about justice, equity, and reconciliation within our communities. In many ways, the Jubilee serves as a model for forgiveness and second chances. The return of land and cancellation of debts mirror the forgiveness that God offers humanity. Each Jubilee year is an opportunity for a fresh start, a chance to let go of past burdens and start anew. This cycle invites us to embrace a mindset of generosity and compassion, reminding us that all we possess ultimately belongs to God. By practicing forgiveness and grace in our own lives, we align ourselves with God's desire for mercy and restoration. The biblical approach to timekeeping challenges us to redefine our sense of worth and purpose. Modern culture often equates value with productivity, but the Bible offers a different perspective, one that emphasizes our relationship with God and others. By prioritizing Sabbath rest, communal worship, and gratitude, we're invited to see our worth not in what we produce, but in who we are as God's children. This approach frees us from the pressures of achievement, inviting us to experience a deeper sense of peace and contentment. Through these cycles, the Bible encourages a perspective on life that values simplicity, humility, and reliance on God. Each day, month, and year becomes a chance to deepen our relationship with the Creator, recognizing that time itself is a gift. This approach to timekeeping transforms our daily routines, helping us to live with purpose and mindfulness. As we align with God's rhythms, we find that our lives are marked not by stress and striving, but by gratitude, peace, and a profound sense of spiritual fulfillment. The concept of starting each day at sunset, as introduced in the biblical calendar, also redefines how we approach rest. In a world where the day typically ends with exhaustion and preparation for the next, the biblical approach offers an intentional pause. By beginning the day with rest, we start each cycle refreshed, reminding ourselves that life is sustained not by endless striving, but by God's provision. This rhythm fosters a sense of trust, teaching us to rely less on our own efforts and more on the spiritual renewal that God offers. As we observe the weekly Sabbath, we learn that God designed rest as an integral part of the human experience. The Sabbath isn't just a day off, it's a sacred invitation to step away from our labor and turn our attention toward what truly matters. This day is about recentering our lives, reminding ourselves of God's love and our purpose beyond daily work. The Sabbath teaches us to pause and appreciate life's blessings, encouraging a mindset of gratitude and humility that influences the way we live each day. The rhythm of the biblical calendar, with its weekly, monthly, and annual observances, also encourages a deep connection to God's story. Each day, week, and year marks an opportunity to remember God's actions throughout history, linking the present with the past. This rhythm creates a spiritual lineage, reminding us that we are part of a greater narrative, a story of divine love, redemption, and hope. By participating in these time markers, we connect with a long tradition of faith, finding strength in knowing that we walk the same path as believers before us. Celebrating new moons as a monthly practice further enriches our connection with God. These observances mark a fresh start, an invitation to assess our lives and refocus on God's purpose for us. The new moon, often celebrated with worship and offerings, symbolizes God's continual renewal of creation. This monthly pause encourages us to evaluate our spiritual journey, letting go of distractions and recommitting ourselves to living in alignment with God's will. It's a regular reminder that, with each cycle, we're given the grace to begin anew. The lunar months, synchronized with the phases of the moon, connect us to a natural rhythm that mirrors the human experience. Just as the moon waxes and wanes, our lives go through cycles of growth and stillness, light and shadow. This alignment with nature serves as a gentle reminder of the ebb and flow of life, teaching us patience and resilience. Observing these rhythms encourages us to embrace life's seasons, finding peace in each phase and trusting that God is present in every moment. The start of the biblical year around the spring equinox reflects a season of rebirth, aligning with themes of new life and hope. As nature begins to blossom, we're reminded of God's promise of renewal. This timing symbolizes a spiritual spring, inviting us to let go of the old and open ourselves to God's transformative work in our lives. The start of the year is a time to reflect on our goals, seek forgiveness, and step forward with renewed faith, aligning our journey with the divine flow of life. The Feast of Passover, marking the beginning of the biblical year, is a profound celebration of freedom and God's deliverance. It commemorates the Israelites' liberation from Egyptian bondage, symbolizing not only a historical event, but a spiritual journey of redemption. Observing Passover reminds believers of God's faithfulness, teaching us that He is present in moments of struggle and triumph. This annual observance calls us to celebrate our own spiritual freedom, to let go of past burdens, and to step into the future with trust in God's guidance.
Thanks for watching our latest videos by clicking on the video in the screen, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.